Beneath the grandeur of medieval Spain, King Ferdinand of Castile rose as one of the most formidable rulers of the late 15th century. His reign began at a time when the Iberian Peninsula was fragmented by internal rivalries, religious divisions, and noble feuds. From his earliest years, Ferdinand was trained not only in governance, but also in the methods of control through fear and discipline. Born into a royal lineage that valued both conquest and faith, Ferdinand was groomed to unite Spain under a single crown and a single religion. His marriage to Queen Isabella of Aragon became one of the most influential alliances in European history. Together, they created a monarchy that blended political ambition with religious orthodoxy, establishing a foundation for centralized rule. The unification of Spain under Ferdinand and Isabella marked the end of centuries of Muslim rule in the south. The capture of Granada in 1492 symbolized the victory of the Christian kingdoms over the Moors, transforming Ferdinand into a national hero. However, his ambition extended beyond territorial victories. He sought to consolidate his power through strict moral and religious uniformity. To ensure unity within his kingdom, Ferdinand relied heavily on the Church and the Inquisition. The Spanish Inquisition, established under his authority, became a state instrument used to monitor heresy and enforce religious conformity. The crown worked closely with inquisitors who reported directly to the monarchy, ensuring that no citizen's loyalty to the Church or the king was ever in question. The king's interest in matters of faith was practical rather than spiritual. He viewed religion as a means of governance, a mechanism for maintaining order in a rapidly expanding empire. The Inquisition's investigations extended to scholars, merchants, and even members of the nobility, all subject to scrutiny under Ferdinand's rule. Economic policies during Ferdinand's reign reflected his focus on central control. Taxes were reorganized, trade was expanded through alliances with neighboring kingdoms, and the wealth from newly conquered territories was directed to strengthen the royal treasury. Spain's maritime expeditions, encouraged under his rule, would later set the stage for overseas expansion and the establishment of colonies. Despite his reputation as a political unifier, Ferdinand's court was known for its atmosphere of strict surveillance. Advisors and ministers lived under the constant eye of royal inspectors. The king established systems for gathering intelligence from across the kingdom, often using clergy and local officials to report on dissent. His governance relied on the concept of absolute obedience. Laws were enforced through royal decrees that left no room for challenge. The crown's authority extended into every aspect of daily life, from commerce and taxation to personal conduct and faith. Even the smallest act of disobedience could be interpreted as treason or heresy. Ferdinand's foreign policy was equally calculated. He pursued alliances that strengthened Castile's position in Europe, marrying his children into other royal families to expand his influence. The Spanish crown became a major power, capable of influencing both the papacy and the politics of neighboring kingdoms. Military discipline reflected the king's administrative style. Soldiers were expected to demonstrate loyalty above all else, with failure in duty punished severely. Discipline was maintained not only through martial codes, but also through public demonstrations of justice, ensuring that fear reinforced obedience within the ranks. The architecture of Spain during Ferdinand's reign mirrored his ideals of order and endurance. Castles and fortresses were expanded, many equipped with deep dungeons for the imprisonment of political and religious offenders. These underground chambers, constructed beneath royal fortresses, became the foundation of a secretive network of state prisons. Within these dungeons, the early forms of interrogation and punishment began to take shape. They were not yet the centers of horror they would later become, but the design of these chambers, isolated, fortified, and soundproof, indicated the king's intent to use confinement as a tool of control. Ferdinand's reforms extended to the judicial system as well. Judges were appointed directly by the crown, and appeals were restricted to royal authority. This centralized structure ensured that the monarchy retained full control over criminal sentencing, particularly in cases involving sedition or heresy. The king's belief in authority through punishment was consistent with the legal traditions of his time. Public executions and corporal punishments were considered essential for maintaining social order. The dungeons, however, represented a more silent form of control, where punishment was unseen but widely feared. As Spain's power grew, so did Ferdinand's ambition. His administration became increasingly occupied with rooting out dissent, and the boundaries between political and religious crimes began to blur. Anyone opposing royal policy could easily be accused of heresy, allowing the Inquisition to act as both a religious and political weapon. The Inquisition's tribunals, established in major cities, reported directly to the monarch. Their proceedings were secret, their records carefully preserved, and their judgments absolute. The accused were often taken from their homes in the night, transported to unknown locations, and interrogated under the authority of the crown. The secrecy surrounding these institutions gave rise to rumors among the populace. Tales of subterranean chambers and silent punishments began to circulate, creating an atmosphere of fear and submission. The king's reputation as a just ruler was overshadowed by whispers of cruelty carried out in his name. Ferdinand's rule established a precedent that would define Spain for generations. The intertwining of religion, monarchy, and punishment created a system where control was both physical and psychological. The royal dungeons, though rarely spoken of in public, became symbols of absolute authority. As his reign advanced, Ferdinand grew increasingly reliant on his network of inquisitors and enforcers. These officials acted as the instruments of his will, ensuring that no rebellion or heretical movement could threaten his unified Spain. The prisons deep beneath his castles began to fill with those accused of opposing divine or royal order. By the late years of his rule, the machinery of control was firmly established. The Inquisition functioned as the silent arm of the monarchy, while the underground dungeons became its unseen executioners. The framework for Spain's most feared instruments of confession and punishment had been set. The era of King Ferdinand's consolidation was complete. His empire stood united under one faith and one rule. Yet beneath the stone floors of his castles, the shadows of his authority began to stir, where the instruments of the crown's most secret justice waited to serve their purpose. Beneath the castles of Castile, the dungeons commissioned during King Ferdinand's reign evolved from prisons into mechanisms of control. The king's administration oversaw their construction with precision, ensuring every chamber served a distinct purpose. Some were designed for holding prisoners, others for interrogation, and a select few for punishment that would never reach public view. The Spanish Inquisition's inquisitors received direct authorization from the crown to extract confessions using any method deemed necessary. The dungeons became laboratories of pain, where techniques were refined and tools were standardized. Among these instruments, the breaking wheel emerged as one of the most effective means of coercion. The breaking wheel, known in Spain as la rueda de confesión, consisted of a large wooden frame mounted on an axle. Iron braces secured the victim's limbs, while the wheel rotated slowly. Each turn allowed the executioner to strike with an iron bar, systematically fracturing bones without immediately causing death. The process was calculated, designed to maximize endurance and suffering rather than deliver a swift end. Quick reminder: if you are enjoying, do like the video and subscribe the channel for upcoming historical content. Records from inquisitorial archives describe these procedures with bureaucratic precision. Every confession extracted under pain was documented, signed by witnesses, and sealed under the authority of the church and the crown. Torture, in this context, was treated not as cruelty, but as a legal instrument to affirm divine justice. The procedure began with formal interrogation. Prisoners were questioned about their beliefs, associations, and family ties. If responses appeared inconsistent or evasive, inquisitors authorized the application of instruments. Guards escorted the accused to the underground chambers, where the environment itself served to break resistance. These rooms were built from dense stone to prevent the escape of sound. The air was thick and damp, the floors uneven, and the only light came from torches mounted along the walls. Chains, pulleys, and iron fixtures lined the perimeter. Every element served a purpose: immobilization, pressure, or restraint. The wheel was often placed at the center of these rooms. Victims were stripped of rank and title before being secured. The inquisitors rarely witnessed the procedure directly. Instead, they remained in adjoining chambers, where confessions were transcribed. The executioners, known as oficiales de tormento, were trained to apply force gradually, balancing pain with endurance. Each fracture was intended to produce both physical and psychological collapse. Prisoners would first resist, invoking faith or innocence. With time, the methodical breaking of the body eroded all conviction. The aim was not death, but submission. A confession was considered valid only if it was repeated later before a notary, without the use of instruments. The Inquisition justified the use of such devices through theological reasoning. The human body was viewed as a vessel of sin, and pain was believed to reveal hidden truths. Heresy was equated with disease, and confession served as the cure. Under this belief, the wheel became an extension of divine correction sanctioned by the state. The process often extended over several days. After each session, the prisoner was returned to confinement to recover partially before interrogation resumed. Physicians employed by the Crown monitored their condition, ensuring survival long enough to secure a complete confession. Their records show calculated attention to anatomy and endurance, demonstrating the administrative precision of these operations. Not all prisoners were condemned heretics. Many were merchants accused of concealing wealth from the Crown, soldiers suspected of disloyalty, or commoners accused of speaking against royal authority. The lines between religious and political offenses had dissolved entirely. In practice, the same instruments addressed both. The breaking wheel was not the only device employed. The potro, rack, and garrucha, strappado, were also used for initial stages of interrogation. The wheel, however, remained reserved for those who resisted beyond the reach of ordinary pain. It was viewed as the final method, one that transformed defiance into confession and silence into compliance. Inquisition records indicate a hierarchy among the torturers. The master executioner directed the process, assisted by attendants who adjusted restraints and maintained the wheel's mechanism. Their work was methodical, devoid of emotion, and guided by established procedure. They were trained to observe, record, and measure rather than express judgment. The administration of these dungeons operated with clerical efficiency. Inquisitorial secretaries catalogued each prisoner, noting their confession, sentence, and outcome. The king's ministers reviewed these records periodically, ensuring that every action served both religious order and political stability. Nothing within these chambers occurred without bureaucratic authorization. The location of the most notorious dungeon, beneath the fortress of Toledo, became a closely guarded state secret. Contemporary observers wrote of the castle's lower halls, where heat and darkness concealed the scent of blood and burning oil. The noise of the wheel turning was rarely heard outside its stone corridors. Travelers who passed near the fortress at night reported strange sounds echoing through the walls. Though speculation was discouraged, rumors persisted that the Crown had perfected methods of confession that could unmake a man without taking his life. Within Spain's rigid society, such whispers reinforced loyalty through fear. Over time, the use of the breaking wheel became symbolic of the Crown's absolute authority. It represented not only punishment, but the idea that the body and spirit belonged to the state. Those who saw its aftermath understood that resistance to the monarchy or the church was futile. The fear it produced achieved what decrees and sermons could not. Artisans commissioned to maintain these devices worked under royal contracts. Each component was standardized: the wheel's diameter, the spacing of its braces, and the density of its iron bars. These specifications ensured uniformity across dungeons in Seville, Toledo, and Valladolid. The system was both centralized and efficient. While the Church justified its use through divine necessity, the monarchy recognized its political utility. The wheel became part of the machinery of governance, an invisible deterrent that sustained obedience across a diverse and restless population. The very existence of these instruments ensured stability without the need for mass executions. As Spain expanded its influence beyond Europe, the methods refined in the dungeons of Castile found application in colonial territories. Reports from overseas mention similar devices adapted for use against indigenous populations accused of defying conversion. The ideology of confession through pain thus extended beyond the Iberian Peninsula. By the final decade of Ferdinand's reign, the network of inquisitorial prisons had reached its peak. Every major fortress contained subterranean chambers staffed by officials trained in both theology and anatomy. The king's policies had achieved their goal, a society united through obedience, silence, and fear. Yet, within the same dungeons that upheld the crown's authority, another transformation began. The instruments that symbolized power would soon expose its fragility. As the decades advanced, the same walls that silenced heretics would whisper of excess, cruelty, and corruption that no confession could erase. In the final years of King Ferdinand's rule, the system he had built began to strain under its own weight. The dungeons that once represented control now symbolized oppression. Reports of excessive torture, wrongful imprisonment, and the deaths of innocents began to circulate quietly among scholars and foreign envoys. The same secrecy that once concealed royal authority now fueled growing distrust. The Inquisition's records, once kept in perfect order, became burdened by contradictions. Confessions obtained under duress often conflicted with one another. Entire families were accused based on coerced statements, leading to social unrest and resentment toward the crown. Local officials began questioning the legitimacy of evidence gathered through the wheel and the rack. Economic and political challenges further weakened the system. The cost of maintaining inquisitorial prisons grew as the number of accused increased. Soldiers were diverted from frontier duties to serve as guards and escorts. Trade declined in several regions due to fear and instability. The very tool designed to strengthen unity had begun to erode it. Among Ferdinand's advisors, some urged reform. They argued that excessive reliance on pain undermined the moral authority of the monarchy. Others, however, insisted that abandoning the old methods would invite rebellion and heresy. The king, aging and cautious, refused to dismantle what he believed had secured his realm. The breaking wheels continued to turn, but the atmosphere within the dungeons had changed. The executioners, once precise and detached, grew careless as morale declined. Records describe instances of prisoners dying before confessions could be recorded, forcing inquisitors to fabricate documents to maintain appearance of order. Administrative precision gave way to silent decay. International observers began documenting Spain's methods with alarm. Reports reached Rome and other European courts, where critics questioned the compatibility of torture with Christian doctrine. The crown's efforts to suppress these accounts proved futile as travelers and exiled scholars carried the stories abroad. After Ferdinand's death, his successors inherited both his empire and his machinery of fear. Yet the climate of Europe was changing. The Enlightenment's early thinkers began to challenge the legitimacy of coercion, emphasizing reason over punishment. Within Spain, quiet resistance took root among clerics who sought to limit the Inquisition's authority. The dungeons gradually emptied as investigations slowed. The breaking wheels, once symbols of royal power, rusted in silence beneath abandoned fortresses. Only fragments of records survived, preserved in church archives and legal codices. These documents offered a glimpse into an era when confession was measured through the sound of breaking bone. The legacy of the bone breakers remained as a testament to the extremes of absolute rule. What began as a system of order evolved into a structure of fear that consumed its own foundation. The wheel that once turned for the king's justice became a relic of excess, proof that power sustained through pain could not endure beyond the silence it imposed.